Good morning. Well, before we get started, let's go ahead and release the kids. If you've got a child between the ages of 4 and 5th grade, you can go ahead and release them now. So my first exposure to rhythms started about 7 years ago. We had just hit the road in an RV and we were traveling the country with our kids. I was working for myself and I knew I had to get work done, but it wasn't a rush. I didn't have to get it done at any particular time. And each day I was able to pick when I could do it. And it created this amazing rhythm for the day. Mornings were usually slow and involved the whole family. Ceci and I would often go for a walk after breakfast, and then the kids would start working on school. Somebody might come by and want to hang out for a little while in the morning or have some coffee. And some days, it wasn't until after lunch that I would really buckle down to get the work done for the day. We'd have dinner as a family, some family time afterwards. I'd work some more as needed, and the day would end with Ceci and I hanging out, watching a show, or listening to a book together. It was a rhythm. It was natural. I was able to move my schedule around based on categories, family, friends, work, spiritual needs, instead of based on deadlines that were imposed by someone or something else. It was a very natural feel. Now, as a family, we're working to figure out what that looks like in a city with a regular 9-to-5 job. I'm working through the same things I'm speaking about today, trying to figure out what they look like for my family in this place and in this time. And rhythms are holy because God put them in place. If we look back at the beginning, Genesis 1, one of the things that God created was day and night. Now, the sun does not show up at 7 a.m. on the dot every single day. It's a rhythm. It ebbs and flows with the season and the time of year. Or planting and harvest. Again, it's a rhythm. It ebbs and flows with the weather. Maybe I need to delay a few days because I need to add some more fertilizer to the soil. There is a natural rhythm that is built into the foundations of our world. And often we are going so fast that we miss them. Rhythms aren't rigid. They flow with life. A routine says, get it done by 8 a.m. And a rhythm says, it's going to get done even if the timing shifts. In fact, there's been a rhythm that we have been participating in since the beginning of the year. I'm going to share some of the statements from all the way from the beginning of the year that we've talked about or that guest speakers have talked about with us. And I want you to kind of look for the connections between them. Pastor Ed started the year off with talking about God is calling us to awaken and speak life to dormant areas. It's a new season. He wants us to participate with him, and we must use our voice. Pastor Brian then moved into a series on clear vision. God doesn't want perfect vision. He wants clear vision. Begin to dream. Begin to look forward. Begin to pray. You have to take action. You have to move. And something that we often forget, you have a purpose. Then we had Scott Neri came, and he talked about you cannot appoint leaders based on their potential. You have to appoint them based on their pattern or their rhythm. God is looking for your pattern or your rhythm. What you focus on is what you desire. Faith is voice activated, just like what Pastor Ed said at the beginning. You have to use your voice. Your choice is in your voice. Breakthrough is not sustainable and does not become transformation until you have follow through, unless you take action, like Pastor Brian said. Follow through is the process that God uses to focus your choices. Pastor Ed then talked about the question, does the body of Christ really know its purpose? Believers do not consider their participation in the plans of God to be of significant importance. And individually, we need to know how God has called us to function. The subjects are all different, and yet if you sit with them for just a few moments, you can begin to make the connections between them. You can see the rhythms in the messages. And so the question then becomes, how do we discover how we are supposed to function? How do we learn about our purpose? How do we make sure we have the right patterns, and how do we participate with the plans of God? I'm going to give you a little bit of history here before I keep going. Around 1760, the Industrial Revolution kicked off and ended sometime around 1960. It was 200 years of machines, factories, and what we typically call progress. It impacted everything in our culture. Our nation was not even born yet, and the Industrial Revolution had kicked off. So what that means is that our nation has no history that does not include a perspective of machines, assembly lines, factories, progress, and efficiency. That's kind of a big deal. And then we fast forward to today. We're beginning another revolution, the information revolution. Back in 2010, Eric Schmidt, then the CEO of Google, dropped this mind-blowing stat. Every 2 days, we create as much information as humans did from the dawn of civilization until 2003. Every 2 days, we create 10,000 years worth of data. That's crazy. That was in 2010. That was 15 years ago. It's not slowing down. The speed of life today is insane. Work, school, after-school activities, groceries, house chores, maybe squeeze in some time for the family and maybe your spouse, and then do it all over again. Some days we barely have time to breathe. Robert Kiyosaki, in his book called Fake, refers to something as accelerating acceleration, the speed of things continuing to accelerate. This is my paraphrase for what he says. Change in the information age is invisible, like a train barreling toward us that we cannot see or hear. Here's the problem. If you can't see or hear the train hurtling towards you, you don't know to get out of the way. It just slams into you. And not only is information speeding up, the rate of change is speeding up as well. The flood of info is growing and getting bigger, but the quality, it's going through the floor. It's tanking. Change is speeding up, and how do we even track what is changing when the information load is so massive? We face unique challenges in the information age. We're trying to grasp a flood of information that we cannot possibly learn, and a speed of change that we cannot see, much less evaluate. Slowing down seems to be the only fix, but how do we do that? What does that look like? I think there's 2 questions that can help. What are you going to focus on, and what are you going to ignore? The first question, what are you going to focus on? Where is your time going to be invested? How can we embrace the moment and the people in it, holding on to Christ and revealing who he is in the earth? If we do not choose what to focus on, we spend our time subject to the tyranny of the urgent, but not the important or the meaningful. The second question, what are we going to ignore? And you might be asking yourself or saying to yourself, that's the same question. And most of the time I would agree with you. However, in a world where the information is insurmountable and the number of changes that are happening is faster than we can track, what you will not allow to take your attention is as important as what you choose to focus on. If we do not choose what we are going to ignore, we get sucked into whatever news, activity, or task is swirling around us. When we do not answer these questions, there is a negative impact on our emotions, our words, our vision, and whether or not it's clear, like Pastor Brian was talking about, our ability to develop a pattern or a rhythm, and our ability to function according to his purpose. So in any discussion, anytime we're talking about change or vast amounts of information, and I would suggest to you that anytime you have a conversation with someone, defining terms is very important. Because you've probably been in a situation where you've had a conversation with somebody for 20 minutes and then you realized we're talking about different things. Because there was a base definition that was not the same, right? I think most of us have experienced that. So let's talk about habits. Habits are mindless. Biting your nails, scrolling social media, stress eating, being impatient, stuff you do without thinking. Routines are deliberate, task-driven, and often time-specific. Brushing your teeth in the morning, getting dressed. I got to pray and read my Bible real quick because I have to be at work at 8 o'clock. Check the box and move on. Rhythms are different and a little bit harder to define. Often, if you think about it, life-giving activities are difficult to define. Rhythms are intentional patterns that are alive and flexible that nourish your soul. Think of a dance, not a checklist. Rhythms are life categories that can be shuffled around during the day to adapt to life as it happens. We've all lived rhythms before, especially as teenagers. Teenagers are uniquely connected with rhythms. I'll give you an example. If you've had a teenager or you've interacted with one, you've probably had a conversation that goes like this. Where are you guys going to go hang out? I don't know. What are you going to go do? I don't know. Okay, well, when are they coming to get you? I don't know. When are you planning to be home? I don't know. Now, we all know we need some planning in our life, right? But teenagers understand something that we typically lose as adults. Rhythm is about presence, not perfection. So when we look at Jesus and we look at his life that's described in the Gospels, it wasn't a frantic checklist. It wasn't task-oriented. He wasn't going through routines every single day. Mark 1:35 says, while it was still night, way before dawn, he got up and went out to a secluded spot and prayed. While it was still night, way before dawn, he slips away to a quiet place. Luke 5:16. As often as possible, Jesus withdrew to out-of-the-way places for prayer. As often as possible. Not at a set time, not every Thursday at 10:30. As often as life allowed. He withdrew to places of prayer, and by implication, places of solitude, where he was alone. In John chapter 13 is the section of where it talks about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Go home, read that this week, and look through it. When you read that, it's not something that looks planned. They get together, and it's almost as if Jesus goes, oh, hey, I could do this now. It's impromptu. It's a casual setting, and it seems like it's spur of the moment. It's not planned. I like this one a lot. John 3:22. After this conversation, Jesus went on with his disciples into the Judean countryside and relaxed with them there. He was also baptizing. What jumps out at you? It's like, hey, we're hanging out. We'll do some baptizing too. All right. He didn't go there to baptize people. He went there to relax with his disciples, to connect with the people that were around them. And when the opportunity presented itself, he baptized. He was using a rhythm and flowing in and out of what was happening in the moment. Jesus didn't clock in at 6 a.m. and say, okay, 6 a.m. to 6:15 prayer time. He flowed with what was happening. He had rhythms, regular, intentional, life-restoring rhythms. Our routines simply drain us. We get enough sleep to get through the next day, not rest so that we can enter the next day as an emissary of the Most High. We tend to live on the bare minimum that routine provides instead of the fullness and life-giving relational rhythm that we have access to. Everything Jesus did, he did as a spirit-filled man. And we tend to look at that and say, yeah, I can do miracles too. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He healed the leper. But it's also how he slowed down. As a spirit-filled man, he slowed down. He wasn't rushed. He rested by the well in John chapter 4, chatting with a Samaritan woman that was culturally unacceptable at the time. It was not appropriate for a Jew to be interacting with a Samaritan. And yet he takes time to go and have a conversation with her and rest and talk about water, living water, life. You know what the disciples are worried about? Lunch. You go read that, and the disciples are worried about lunch. They're worried about their routine. Jesus was worried about the rhythm. Rest can be difficult when we only have a perspective of warfare. And a lot of us have been exposed to this. I know I have, growing up in the church. There's so much warfare to do. The devil and his forces to fight. So much sin in the world and in me that needs to be addressed and held constant vigil against so that it doesn't impact me. But if you remember what our two questions are, what am I going to focus on and what am I going to ignore? Now, what I'm not saying is that we should ignore sin. I want you to walk away with that conclusion. But I have made this mistake, and perhaps you have too. We focus on sin as the main problem. We wake up, hey, I haven't sinned yet. Whew, check. Hey, it's lunchtime, hadn't done anything bad today. Getting it done. I'm right? That's the way we're kind of trained, and that's what I've done it. That's what I tend to watch for. Okay, I haven't done anything bad today. I'm winning, right? But the devil isn't messing with most of us the majority of the time, because most of us are so busy, we're ineffective as Christians. The vast majority of Christians in America are not making his kingdom known here because we're worried about a routine. We're worried about a task list. We're not worried about relational life, relational rhythms. If we were connected to the relational rhythm with the Father that Jesus gave us access to, we would be in a very different place. Not because we elected the right people, but because people's hearts were impacted and changed by what was happening through us. We can have a tendency to measure our life by avoiding bad stuff or bad things, i.e. sin, thinking that if we fix sin, we have fixed the fall. But the fall wasn't about sin. Sin was the effect. It was about losing relationship with the Father. Remember how I said rhythm is about presence, not perfection? Relationship is about presence. But if we put our focus on not sinning, meaning I am focused on perfection, then there's no room for relationship. And relationship is the fix for what was lost in the garden. Relationship connects us to the Father. Connecting with the Father and listening to him throughout the day and living out that relationship. A rhythm of life isn't task-driven, meaning do this, or avoidance-driven, don't do that. It's relational, organic, and alive. As a parent, I'm sure you've experienced the crazy, chaotic mornings. Kids, got to get ready for school, got to get them dressed, got to get lunches made. I spilled my coffee, now I got to go change my clothes. A routine says, pray at 7 a.m. or bust. A rhythm says, I'll pray today, maybe over breakfast, maybe in the car, but I am going to talk to God. It's flexible, but it's focused. Or a rhythm might mean silencing your phone and getting away by yourself for 10 minutes to listen. Really listen to God every day at some point, but not necessarily at the same time every day. If you go back and read in Hebrews chapter 4, there are some warnings about this. There's a section in the beginning where they're quoting from Exodus, where the Israelites did not go into the promised land. And God says, exasperated, I vowed that they would never enter my rest. Hebrews 4 goes on and quotes one of David's Psalms. Today, please listen and don't turn a deaf ear. The chapter continues, there remains a Sabbath rest for God's people, but some didn't enter because they didn't believe. Now, if we connect all of those dots, right? They will never enter my rest. They didn't enter the rest because they didn't believe. How do we believe? By listening, right? We say it another way. Faith comes by hearing. Faith, belief, pretty similar concept. So if I am not listening, if I am not believing, then I'm probably not resting. And if I reverse that and say, if I'm not resting, I would ask you what you're listening to. Because it goes the other way too. What or who are you listening to? Are you too busy talking, asking, or doing to hear what he has to say? Let's look at a few of Jesus' rhythms. Luke 5:16. As often as possible, Jesus withdrew to out-of-the-way places for prayer. We've talked about that. And when you look and you go through the Gospels and you look at the rhythms of Jesus, this is referenced all the time. He went away to pray. He looked for places of solitude. He looked for places to be alone. Mark chapter 6. As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted that the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead across to Bethsaida while he dismissed the congregation. After sending them off, he climbed a mountain to pray. You climbed a mountain lately? I mean, think about this verse. I should point up there. I'm looking back there. As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted. Can you imagine Jesus insisting, hey, we just got done. Go away. We're done. No, go across the lake. Shoo. And then he didn't just go by himself to pray. He climbed a mountain. That's an interesting detail to me. He climbed a mountain to pray. It wasn't just, oh, hey, I need to go sit under the tree and relax. There was physical exertion involved in forcibly getting away. I personally wonder, from my own experience, if part of that was I need to do something physical so that my body will be quiet when I get there. Just my personal question. Jesus often traveled. When you read through the Gospels with a fresh eye, well, I say a fresh eye. Here's what I mean. Have you ever heard of the lullaby effect? The lullaby effect means that you've seen something so many times, you do not actually connect with the material anymore. So the reason it's called the lullaby effect is because when we talk about lullabies, right? You know the one about the cradle and the top of the tree? That's creepy. Why is a kid in the top of the tree? We're singing them to bed with it. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. Anybody else got anxiety right now? We're watching a kid in a cradle rocking back and forth in the top of a tree, at least in our mind's eye. When the bough breaks, disaster strikes, the cradle will fall and down will come baby. Hey, go to sleep with a horror story, woohoo! But we don't think of it that way. We don't make that connection because we've heard it over and over and over and over again. And a lot of the time, that's what we do with the Bible. We read it and we say, I already know what this means. Man, that's really good. I'm glad I got encouraged today because I've already seen what this means. But when you look at the Gospels and you read through them and say, I'm going to read through the Gospels and see what the rhythms of Jesus were, and you look for something specific, you will have amazing details jump out at you. In Jesus' travels, you look at what he's doing and the flow. He's pausing, he's stopping, he's going to Zacchaeus' house. He's moving around, interacting with people in a rhythm. When you look at the story of when he heard about Lazarus, this was a close friend. Lazarus is sick. This is a guy who's done miracles. He's like, yeah, okay. And he waits 2 more days before he goes. Would you be mad if your friend who did miracles waited 2 more days to come to you when you were sick? Probably. But Jesus wasn't caught in the tyranny of the urgent. My friend being sick is urgent. But for Jesus, he knew that he could take care of him dead or alive. So he was worried about meaning. He was worried about what was important. And so he waited. He was engaged in a rhythm, and he took time to talk to people. He took time to have meals with people along the way. And when you look at Acts 2, the early church is eating together, praying together. It describes them as sharing everything. They were operating in this rhythm with each other, this rhythm of life that was given as an example by Jesus' life. They were walking it out. In Mark 2, verse 27, sorry, let me get to where I need to be. The end of the verse, then Jesus said, the Sabbath was made to serve us. We weren't made to serve it. He didn't view the Sabbath as a routine. He viewed the Sabbath as a gift, as something that was a benefit, not something that was a law. So he was focused on rest. So as we look at the list, prayer, solitude, rest, fasting, if you read through the Gospels and you look for what Jesus said about fasting, that I'm aware of, he does not give an explicit command. But everywhere he speaks about fasting, it's an assumption. He says, when you fast. That's not a command. He doesn't say, make sure you fast. He says, when you fast. He's assuming that that is a part of your daily rhythm or your monthly rhythm or your quarterly or your annual rhythm. He's assuming that it is a piece of your life. And then go ahead and put the last 2 up. Silence and listening. These are implied. When we talk about prayer, when we talk about solitude, we look at silence. I can't listen unless I'm quiet. Have you ever been in a church service where you feel the presence of the Lord and all of a sudden somebody starts talking? We're not used to silence. We don't like it. You clean the house with nothing going on, or do you clean the house with music on? Do you always have something in the background going on? It's not always, but my youngest, she likes to crochet. She's always got a TV show on. She's barely paying attention to it. It's just background noise. But silence is a spiritual practice that we have to learn, that we have to exercise those muscles. And if we don't have the silence, we can't listen, which means we can't hear. And often we miss silence and listening because prayer, we only use it as this is what I need. We don't use it as a relational conversation where we go to him and say, Father, I am struggling today. So-and-so did this at work. That really made me mad. I don't like them right now. I don't have nice things to say about them. I need your help. That is coming from a place of relational connection as opposed to, God, I need more money. Or God, I need a promotion. Or I need this to happen or that to happen. Prayer ought to be a conversation. And in intimate relationships, those conversations happen with just two people around. And they alternate between speaking and listening. Listening, what we hear determines what we believe, and believing can determine our level of rest. They're not boxes to check, they're invitations to slow down. What if rest for you looked like no screens for a day? What would you do for a day if you didn't scroll, shop, or eat out? Other than go crazy, what would you do? What if you went and just sat by the lake and allowed nature to tell you about the Creator? What if you took a walk with a friend, read a book, and relaxed into that rhythm instead of saying, I'm going to read for 20 minutes because I have to next? Rhythms require intent, but they are not passive. You have to choose to engage and to focus on a rhythm. And if we will focus on the rhythms of Jesus and ignore the speed of change and the vast amount of information that then we may be able to listen and rest. The rhythms are where life and relationship flow from. Fighting change or information, fighting anything in a lot of scenarios, takes us out of relational connection. Because if I'm trying to do something on my own, and I can't, and I begin to fight that thing, I'm not relationally connected. But if I go to Pastor Casey and I say, hey, I need some help, and he goes, oh yeah, we can do this easy because there's two of us now, that's relational connection. It's not worried about the task list. It's being humble enough to recognize that I need help and that I'm not the all-encompassing end-all be-all. The challenge, if you choose to try and implement some of what I'm suggesting, slowing down, engaging in rhythm and relationship, let me give you a little advice. Pick one thing, and only one, to start with. Because we've all failed at something. And a common one in America is, I need to go on a diet. Right? Or I need to lose weight. What's required on a diet in America? Well, I have to get up earlier because I have to work out. I have to eat better. I have to meal prep. I have to change what I'm eating. I have to go to bed earlier because I'm getting up earlier. Do you know how many things you have to change to have that level of change in your life for that many things? That's why everybody fails. And a lot of times we look at change or things that we want to do in our life as a magic pill. If I can just change these 6 things, life will be better. But the problem is each of those 6 things takes massive amounts of energy to change. And we don't have it. I mean, I said it jokingly, but you talk about a diet, right? I'm going to get up earlier. What does that mean? Probably have to go to bed earlier. Well, what's your bedtime routine? Well, I don't have one. Well, you're going to have to get one if you're going to go to bed earlier. So now I don't have to go to bed earlier. I have to put mental energy and emotional energy into what am I going to stop doing in the evening in order to go to bed at X time. That takes energy. That takes mental force. That takes emotional force. That takes, in some ways, spiritual energy. Because we are a complete being. 3 parts: body, soul, and spirit. Which means that everything we do is engaging all 3 of those things. So when I'm putting energy into what's my bedtime routine so that I can go to bed earlier, that's taking energy, available energy from something else. And so when we talk about, not only do I have to figure out what I'm going to do at night, now I have to get up earlier. Who's tried to change what time they get up in the morning? It was really easy, wasn't it? No, it's not. It's not. And depending on who you are, it's hard to sleep in. My mom will tell stories that as a 5-year-old, I was up at 6 a.m. It was just a part of my body clock. Even today, I try to sleep in. Sleeping in for me is 8, maybe. I just can't. I get up at 7:30 because the sun's up. I feel like my nephew. He's like, Dad, sun up, sun up. It's time to go. But we don't realize how many auxiliary impacts there are when we try to change one thing. So pick one. Pick one of those rhythms. And it's okay for that to be the only rhythm that you worry about for a few months. Relax into that and engage that rhythm. Because God designed us for relationship, not tasks. And the world's pace is relentless, but Jesus' rhythm is life. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." So if you decide to step into that this week, do it one prayer and one quiet moment at a time.
Amen. Amen. That was good, right? You know, as he was talking, I was thinking about what rhythm is not. Rhythm is not perfect routine, right? Our walk with Christ is far less complicated than we tend to make it, right? Because there's a freedom in being in rhythm with the Father, right? There's rest and peace, like Pastor Aaron said. We can't force it. Because I think when we try to force it, when we try to make it about perfection and doing this routine, then when we do that, it becomes religion. And where religion is, guilt inevitably will follow. All right? But what is rhythm? What I took from this, what is rhythm? Rhythm is relational, right? I think about, as he was talking about, I was thinking about my father. So my dad is this type of man where no matter what was going on in our lives, whenever he came into a situation, I could take a deep breath. I would have this thought, everything's going to be okay, my dad's here. I was no longer afraid or worried about the future. I still feel that today. I'm 37, and I call my dad. And he may not have the solution, but he answers the phone. And that's all I'll need. When, Dad, I can't get this to work. I don't know, and he'll be like, it's all right, son, we'll figure it out. We have an abundance of peace and rest, not because we worked for it, not because we fought for it, but because we found the Father through Christ. And all we have to do is try to put down the routine and just rest in the rhythm. Amen. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Do not forget those Connect cards. If you are visiting us today, please go ahead and take that Connect card. When we go out the double doors, go to the left. We have a Connect table. Go ahead and turn that in. We just have a gift for you saying thank you. And I want to leave you with this. The Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he give you peace and restore your soul. Have a good week.